Yedidsion. He's a patent attorney at Concepts IP LLP. He's going to share with us AI and data science in the world of IP. Let's welcome.
Hello everyone, my name is Pejman Yedidsion. I go by PJ, it's easier to follow. I'm a patent attorney at Concept IP, as was just mentioned. I'm going to break up all the technical talk with some legal advice here, or at least what I'm hoping to give everyone is a way to identify whether their company or startup or as even an individual wants to or should protect their intellectual property in whether it's software, AI, and if they do, how to do that. A little bit about myself, just background. I'm a patent attorney practicing before the United States Patent and Trademark Office. I have a bachelor's of science in computer science from UCLA. I worked as an engineer, and now I've been a patent attorney for about 11 years now. And naturally, our focus area of the firm is drafting software and technology patents. I think I can just skip over this one, just general understanding of AI and data science. We've talked about it already, so I can just skip over this. What is a patent? At the core of it, it's an intellectual property right. There is a misconception. A lot of people think that if they get a patent, that means that they can practice and use whatever their invention was that they got a patent for, but it's really sort of the opposite. It gives you the right to exclude others from making, using, and even selling that claimed invention that you have in the patent. And patents are, territorial, as it says here. It says per country. It's not. There's no general one. And there's really, we'll go over this later too, but it has to, there's certain requirements it has to meet for it to get there, and it's subject matter eligible, it has to be new, useful, and unobvious. And there's different types of utility applications of machines, articles of manufacture, processes, which is what we'll focus on today, which software falls under, and compositions of matter. Now, talking about some trends, I personally was surprised myself, but looking at AI-related patent filings at the USPTO, and obviously the graph speaks for itself, it's doubled over the last, from 2002 to 2018. So over 16 years, it went from 30,000 to 60,000 filings, which indicates obviously that that's the general trend of technology. That's where everyone is focusing on, and that's the majority of filings that are AI related. So this is not just, it's software, but AI related as well. And as everyone here knows, AI is being used beyond just cutting edge stuff. It's in finance, which is saw that banking, finance. Airlines are using it. Fitness equipment, just the gamut of products are all using AI as a way to function better. Now, identifying reasons to file for a patent application. And it's not a one-size-fits-all. It really depends on the company, depends on the startup company, and the goals. So, one of the main thing to look at is business strategy. Does it make sense to file for patent? Because you have to spend money in order to get a patent granted. And therefore, what is the end goal? Is there value in having a patent portfolio in case of an exit, in case of selling the company to a bigger company, what's the exit strategy? What can patents do to help with the overall value and market share of that company? And other reasons would be, AI specific is the pandemic. Everyone, experienced it. Software innovation became more important. Everyone was remote. And just the general trend has been going toward AI, ML, and data science, and just so in general, it's just it's become a bigger deal than maybe 2-3 years ago. This was actually. It wouldn't be surprising, but it was a surprise to me, but 60% of recently granted patents, not just filed, these are ones that were actually gone through the process at the patent office and granted in the US were software-related patents. Usually you think of widgets and things getting patented, but it seems like software is slowly just growing in that area, and 60%, I'm predicting that 60% will grow over time and become 65, 70, 80% as time goes. So a quick history of software patents. In 2014, the Supreme Court took up a case called Alice, which had with it, it was a software that kept track of bank account balances and making sure that the account never was overdrafted. And so these two, Alice and CLS Bank, had a lot of money, and they went all over the Supreme Court, and everybody was looking at them to give us some guidance as to, okay, what is patentable, what is not. The test that came out of that particular Supreme Court ruling was, it was a two-part test. First, determining whether an invention involves an abstract idea. So abstract ideas, which are natural phenomena, laws of nature, physics, things like that, are not patentable. But the key here was that there was a second part to this test, and it's whether the invention includes an inventive step or inventive concept, which we'll dig into further in my other slides. Now, a few years later, a federal circuit case made this a little bit more, I guess, easier to follow, where they came up with this technical effects doctrine, where they held that software that improves the functionality of a computer is eligible for patenting. Again, we'll discuss this a little bit more about the improving of functioning of a computer. So where does patent eligibility stand today? One of the things to consider is mathematical concepts. We just mentioned that. Any theories of physics, those things that have already existed, and things that are part of human activity or mental processes are not patentable. The test is whether there's an improvement to the computer's functionality. So a lot of times with AI, the determining factor will be, okay, is there an improvement to the way that the software is making the computer function? I think in one of the previous presentations, a lot of talk was made of how do we utilize the CPU processing power and the memory and not use too much data, space on the hard drive. And so all of those go to the improvement of computer functionality if that company decides that this is something they may want to apply for patent protection for. Just a quick thing, recently there was a case that everybody was hoping the Supreme Court would pick up and give us even more guidance as to what defines an abstract idea and what is patentable and what is not. That was Axle and manufacturing, which the Supreme Court actually did not pick up. But that one, I thought it was interesting that it included a way to quiet the drive shaft noise using some physics principles, but at the same time, it was actually used in real world where reducing the noise was an improvement to the machine. So it had both both aspects in it, but the Supreme Court declined it and kind of left us with this uncertainty, which brings me to the last point on this slide, where minus this, or without having clear, specific guidelines, applicants are advised to include technical benefits in the invention. So what is the invention benefiting? Is it improving the functionality of the computer? And what capabilities is the computer able to have now where it didn't before? So a little bit more specific on AI and AI-related inventions. The general application of AI and ML to solve a problem is not eligible for patentability. However, general application, when it's supplemented with technical contribution, meaning that there is some advancement made or technical advantage to the computer using this AI or ML solution, then we go into the patentability arena. And again, data and manipulation of data is not technically patentable subject matter just because you're moving data from one place to another. That's not patentable in the eyes of the USPTO and Supreme Court. But what is the improving the functionality of a computer using or under these types of data and how the data is manipulated. So if you don't have to store all the data in one place and only can somehow figure out a way to use a smaller piece, then you can use that as a way to improve the functionality of the computer and go into the patentable arena. And generally, AI inventions improve, another technology or a technical field, and they show improvements to the functionality of the computer itself. That's obviously not the case every time, but those are two big things to look for if anyone's considering protecting their AI-related invention using patents. So what are some considerations for AI-related patents? I thought the best way to describe this was using one of the requirements that's been around for ages for patent applications, and that's enablement. And that requirement is that you have to sufficiently disclose your idea in this document to enable someone else similarly skilled in the art to be able to make and use it. So in that sense, you don't have to copy and paste your source code, but you have to be able to describe the functionality in a way that someone else has the ability to replicate it. The thought behind that is the point of patents is at the larger scale. If you have a patent on a process, someone doing the same thing would potentially be paying you licensing fees, and it's really more for the bigger Fortune 500 companies, but that is one of the end goals, and that's why it has to be described sufficiently. So when it comes to AI and software and making sure that if a patent is being filed, what are the things to be should an inventor identify? And that would be, what structure is executing which function. So you have to clearly define that and look for that, and look at how various structures interplay with each other. Is data being passed from from the memory to the hard drive and then back to another hard drive and to the memory? So the interplay of all the internal workings. Coming up with alternative variations. How else can this be done? Can this be all used on a hard drive? Can it all be in memory? So there's all these different ways that it could, and I'm using that as an example because we just had a presenter talk about it. And then the detailed description of what needs to go in a patent in order to make sure that we are able to capture this novelty and this invention and be part of the subject matter that is patentable. So any particular algorithms, what features of that algorithm are being used. Training, how is the training implemented? The format of the input or the output data for the model. The predicted output, in the inference phase, or even the criteria used for assessing when to stop the training. So all of these are obviously just examples. There's a full set of these that that can be considered, but the idea here is what is being done? What is the function that's being performed? In that the training, for example, and actually I've talked to a lot of examiners recently, the training is not something a human being can do. So having that training, that being part of your patent application is useful because that's what will allow the examiners of the patent office, or even in the future if it's ever litigated, the courts, to look and say, well, this is not something that a human can do in their mind. And this is, the training is improving the functionality of this computer. And then kind of generally talking about patents and timing considerations, when is a good time to file a patent application, when is not a good time to file. The rule of thumb is that you need to file your patent application before a public disclosure. And one way to really look at this is if someone puts their invention out there and waits over a year, so the US has a 1-year grace period, then now they can't file for a patent application on it because they've already gotten 1 year of that grace period protection, and now they're going beyond that. So if they want to file something 10 years later, that's not really, technically it's not allowed. And so their own public disclosure can be used against them to reject their application. And then a few years ago, or I think more than a few years, the US switched to a first to file system, meaning that to prove that you had the invention first, you have to file the patent application as soon as possible to be first in line and get a filing date for that application. There's different filing strategies. Different companies use different methods. There's 2 different ways to get a patent application and a filing date at the USPTO, US Patent Office. One is a provisional patent application. This one, some of the features are, it's a low-cost way to do it. There's less formalities that are required for this filing, and you essentially are filing this to give yourself that 12 months to file the non-provisional, which we'll talk about in a second, in order to be able to have that filing date and be able to prove that you had the invention in your hand at this particular date. So the provisional patent application does not get examined, meaning that no one's looking at it. It's just really sitting in a database at the patent office, well protected, I hope, and so that there's no doubt that you had this invention at this particular date. So the provisional patent application is sort of the first leg, the first half of this, and the non-provisional patent application would be the second half, where you claim priority to that provisional patent application within that 1 year when you come to file that. And that's when the application that gets examined. So you can skip the provisional, and I have a few clients that don't like filing provisionals. They want to file a non-provisional, which is ready, fully worked on, ready to go application. And in that sense, the cost is higher up front, but that you're more sure that you want to pursue this. The provisional can be used in a scenario where you feel like you may or you may not pursue this application or this strategy in the future, but you want to just have it as insurance in case you do want to pursue it. And we talked about this earlier, but for the non-provisional patent application that goes in front of the patent examiner, there's 5 requirements. Patentable subject matter, which we've talked about, can't be an abstract idea, can't be a law of nature, and as long as it's software that's improving the functionality of a computer, then that is patentable subject matter. It needs to provide utility, it has to be novel, it has to be unobvious, and enablement, which is also, enablement was a point I talked about earlier in figuring out the best way to describe your invention, because you have to enable someone else to pick up this document and do the same thing that you've done without undue burden on them. So if a company has decided that they want to develop a patent portfolio, for whatever reason, I'll give some examples in a second, there's a few, just really 4 basic steps you have to follow. You have to be able to identify the inventions for patent coverage, which we've gone over a little bit today for software and AI patents. So how do you identify it? What do you look for? What do the engineers look for? And then you prepare the patent application. Most of the time, obviously as a patent attorney, we'd like to be involved because there's certain things that we know that the inventors don't know that we can advise them on and help them know what to put there, not put, what should go in it and what should not go in there. And then once the application is filed, you're going in front of the United States Patent and Trademark Office to show them that you meet those 5 requirements and that you should get this patent granted. And then once you do get a patent or 2 or 3, now you have a portfolio, and now you want to have a patent administration program, which requires maintenance of these patents. Once you get a patent granted, you do need to pay a maintenance fee at the 3.5, 7.5, and 11.5 year mark. And so, and the reason for that is they want to make sure no one gets a patent and just sits on it. I think the idea is to encourage people to use the patent, to allow others to use it, and to hopefully get some royalties out of it. And that's my talk for today. Thank you for having me, for your time. I will go back to my first, one of my first slides that I think I skipped over quick, which was the agenda. I don't think I talked about it. So hopefully we got some basic definitions, understanding of what patents are. We talked about trends with AI-related patent filings. As you guys saw, the chart was going up. We went over some reasons to file, and on this particular point, I had a client 2-3 years ago, before they were acquired by Amazon, where they went on a spree of filing patent applications, which is application after application after application. And at the time, we weren't sure at the firm, why are they filing so many applications? Obviously, we're happy we're getting the work, but a few months later, we saw that Amazon acquired them. And when I looked into it further, one of the reasons they filed all these patent applications was to have a bigger patent portfolio and to increase the valuation, so the owner can get more money out of Amazon. So anytime you can do that, I guess you should. We also talked about the state of patent eligibility, the improvement to the functionality of a computer was, I think, the main point out of that, and some considerations in AI-related patent applications. And then we also talked about patent filings, timing. Like I said, if the strategy for the company is they want to protect their idea, their invention, it should be done as early as possible. Obviously, once the idea has been fully developed, but not before it's been released to the public. And with that, I'll open it up to questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. First, 2 questions. First is, what's the average cost of a patent application? And then second, as might be a little off topic for you, but you are an attorney, so I thought I'd ask. Where are we today? What's the status of image protection? People upload images. All of these images and ideas and words are being used to generate AI. Where are we today with monitoring that, or policing that, or what's your thought on that?
Yeah, so on the second question, one interesting thing that came out of that is recently there was a case where the inventor was actually an AI software that actually, it wasn't an image, so that's copyright. And I'll talk about that in a sec. But the patent, the inventor was not a human being. And that went to, I think it went up to the federal circuit. And they ruled that an inventor, you need to have a human being be an inventor. You can't have the computer be named as an inventor on an invention. So when it comes to copyright, I think it's similar where it depends who has the rights to it. If the computer is generating it, I think it's still a gray area. I don't know if there's any case law that's really gone up too far in the court system to really see what they're going to rule out. And my hunch is it's going to be similar to the patent one, where they're going to say you need to have some human aspect in there. And then to your first question on cost. So that approach that I mentioned with filing a provisional and then a non-provisional, that really you're breaking up the fees. And if you want to think about it, for the provisional, if you set aside, again, with inflation, I don't, this may not, if someone watches this video in 2024, I don't know if this number will make sense, but about $5,000 for a provisional to prepare and file, another $5,000 to get the second leg, make it into a non-provisional, and get it in front of the patent office. And for budgeting, I saw this, 84% of patent applications that are filed get a rejection from the patent office. And so it's a small percentage that goes through right away. So you have to put aside another $5,000 of a couple of times going back and forth with the patent office, just to make sure the examiner understands your idea, that they're given a limited amount of time. They have to read through this and quickly assess whether they can find prior art that's similar or not. So a lot of times you have to go back to them and show them, look, I'm different, this invention is different because X, Y, and Z, and you can make your arguments.
Thank you.
Sure.
I have a question. In terms of AI-related patent from an international perspective, what's the most, for example, countries which generated the AI-related patents? Right now, I think number one should be United States, number two should be China, right?
I can't say for sure, but I was looking at some data. I think it was US, and then China. There was actually one of these, I'm sure everyone's seen on LinkedIn, one of these videos that shows things over time, and it was a graph of patent filings. And it showed how the United States in the beginning was like, their graph was way ahead of everyone else, but all other countries are coming up now, and I think where the video, this little short video ended was they were ahead, but they were not ahead by as much as they were 10, 15, 20 years ago. Any other ones?
Thank you so much for your speech. I'm really interested in AI-generated content, and as far as I know, if blockchain they have some property can be used to protect the copyright or to make the artist have more revenue. I'm wondering, do you start to have some cooperation with blockchain companies?
So I think the extent of our work with blockchain companies has been on the patent side. Not so much on the copyright side. I think copyright it's still playing catch up. It's one of those areas that's a little bit more behind. Patent's supposed to be more the innovation side, so the USPTO tends to be more in line. They've had a lot of recently AI conferences and AI specific topics. But on the copyright side, it's Library of Congress. They're a little bit more sleepier, so I think they haven't caught up. So we haven't really had much. At least I haven't seen too many resources or things coming out of that area with copyrights and blockchain and AI generated art.
Yeah, thank you. So I just want to ask, do you actually see it's more common for larger corporations or like startups to file patents? And is that easy for like a small startup to file patents?
So my theory on patents and startups is it's more of an insurance policy, because when you're really at startup at the beginning stages and you're coming up with a new product, there's not a lot of noise and not attention on you, and so there's not as much a chance of some big company coming and saying, hey, you're infringing our patent. and trying to stop you from getting into the market. It's when you get a little further in, you start taking a little bit of share from some of the bigger names, and that's when they wake up and they all have big patent portfolios, and they go through their list and they're like, oh well, here's patent number 4 and 5. They could be infringing it. Let's send them a letter. And so for me, having this at minimum a provisional patent application filed gives you the option that if you go through the process and you can get a patent granted for the startup, when the bigger guys come knocking on your door and say you're infringing, you at least have something on your side to go back with and say, look, you may be infringing my patent. So now let's talk. Let's see, maybe we can do a cross-licensing agreement. Maybe we can just agree to leave each other alone. So it gives you a little bit of leverage. Whereas if you didn't have anything, you really are at the mercy of whether you really are infringing or not, and having to change your product and the way you do it if you don't want to pay a licensing fee to them. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
I think we have one more here.
This should be very quick. So when you're applying for a patent, when does it become public knowledge? Because I think there's several processes. And then the other question is, how many, because I've had a few interactions with companies that are actually just mining that information and then they actually end up creating other patents out of that. Are you seeing a lot of activity in that as well?
Yeah, so provisional patents do not become publicly available. That's those 12 months when you have the patent pending period, no one can see that. When you file a non-provisional, if you do the normal way, it gets published within 18 months. However, you can request for it not to be published if that matches the strategy of the company, and you go through the process. If it gets granted, at that point is when it will become publicly available for someone to see it. Whereas you can, again, if you hide it, the downside to it is it's not prior art to the other. So when you were saying some people see the published application, hopefully the patent office also sees it and says, oh well, this is it's an obvious variation of what this other person's patent was, and reject these copycats. And if not, there's also other means to actually attack the patent. But in general, you can keep it secret as long as possible, if needed. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, TJ. And great questions from the audiences, and your sharing on AI-related patent application and portfolio management. At least brand new knowledge for me.